Greetings ghostly followers and welcome to this week's show. We've made it to episode 5 and I'd just like to take a moment to thank everyone that has liked, subscribed and left comments. Honestly, this channel is turning into a really nice community where people can share their paranormal experiences. So today I thought we should shake things up a bit and cover a well-known paranormal entity, La Llorona. La Llorona, also known as the Weeping Woman, is a famous legend in Latin American folklore, particularly in Mexico and other Hispanic cultures. The story has several variations, but the basic narrative revolves around a woman known as La Llorona, who, after experiencing a tragic event, wanders the streets at night, crying for her lost children. If you look online, you'll often find this story associated with Mexico. However, if you look a little further, you'll find very similar stories associated with Guatemala, Venezuela, and even Aztec cultures. In the modern day, it's Mexico that the story seems to have stuck with though. One common version of the legend suggests that La Llorona was a beautiful woman named Maria, who fell in love with a wealthy man. They had children together, but the man eventually abandoned Maria for a woman of higher social standing. In a fit of rage and despair, Maria drowned her children in a river. Realising what she'd done, she was consumed by grief and remorse and began wandering the streets, crying and searching for her children. The legend of La Llorona has been passed down through generations, evolving over time and adapting to different cultural contexts. It serves as a cautionary tale, warning against the consequences of jealousy, abandonment and the mistreatment of children. While the origins of La Llorona are difficult to trace definitively, it is believed that the legend has roots in pre-Columbian mythology, with elements of European folklore and Catholic symbolism added over time. The story has become deeply ingrained in the cultural consciousness of many Latin American communities, and continues to be passed down through oral tradition, literature, film, and other forms of media. In the modern era, the story of La Llorona has widespread notoriety, and has been perpetuated across multiple media such as newspaper reports, books, and even the basis for several movies. The story sometimes changes a little, but most focus on the supernatural nature of the lady. I'll read out a typical account from Reddit. This story was submitted by user DellaCurls and is entitled, "My mum saw La Llorona in Mexico when she was 15. Alright, so this story has been told to me by my mum a few times, and every single time I still get that creepy, eerie feeling that someone is watching me. My mum is from a small town in Mexico, located in Zacatecas. When she was around 14, she had the habit of waking her mum up to go to the restroom, since it was an older home and the restroom was located outside. My mum tells me that it was around 3 AM when she woke up and felt the need to use the restroom urgently. So she began calling out for her mum. After a while of her mum not responding, she began getting agitated and started screaming. At this point, my mum turns around and at the foot of the bed, she sees her mum standing there. She was wearing a white robe but had a very bleak expression on her face, and both of her arms were extended. My mum said that she suddenly felt extremely cold and a huge sense of dread. She had never seen her mum wear a white robe. That's when she looked down and saw her mum's feet weren't touching the floor. At that moment she screamed and quickly threw the covers over her head. Her mum, wearing something completely different, runs in to find my mum shaking in her bed. Nobody believed my mum. Everyone told her it was a dream. Until a few days later, there was a power outage. During this, my mum and a few of her siblings with her parents all decided to sleep in the living room. At around the same time, at around 3 AM, they heard the same undeniable wails of La Llorona down the street. None of them slept that night. This story not only encapsulates the physical vision of La Llorona, but also the associated wailing, something which is quite common in these stories. Although in this case, it isn't mentioned that they're anywhere near a river or water, which is one of the key components to the La Llorona story. I'll read a second Reddit story submitted by Brenda07, and this one's entitled, "My Dad Saw La Llorona." My dad would tell me his experience with La Llorona when he was younger. My dad grew up in Guanajuato, Mexico. He lived miles away from school and he had to walk or ride his bike to get there, and he would pass a huge river every day. He told me how he met his first wife when he was a teenager, and she lived near the school, so he had to go by the river to get her. He stayed out pretty late since they went on a date, and he met her parents and stayed for dinner. When he was riding his bike back, he said it started to rain really hard, making it hard for him to get home since it was dark and the only source of light he had was the moonlight shining through some clouds. He stopped near the river to go under a big tree to get out of the rain, when he heard noises of a woman crying. He saw a lady crying by the river. He said he instantly got chills and goosebumps, but thought it was from the rain. He said at first he didn't think it was her. He couldn't really see her face or anything, since he was too far away, so all he could see was the silhouette of a woman. He decided to ask if she was okay, so he started yelling at her, asking if everything was alright, and she stopped crying and got quiet. All you could hear was the rain hitting the ground, and he said he was going to check on her, until he heard a blood-curdling scream. He knew he'd fudged up, and got on his bike and pedalled as fast as he could to get home. He got home and went to my abuelita room and asked her to start praying and told her what happened. They stayed up all night praying until the next day. So there you have it, one more account of La Llorona. So I like this one mainly because of the context. Brenda07 doesn't really seem to post any other supernatural stories on Reddit herself. It's a really good example of a La Llorona story as well. We get the old lady, we get the wailing, and we also have the river and water associated with it. It seems to tick all of the boxes, at least of the classic telling of the story. Again, we don't have any direct supporting evidence, which is always an issue with these stories. You're effectively hearing this story third hand, as I'm reading Brenda's account, as relayed to her by her father. As you can imagine, there's always opportunity for a story to get embellished or distorted over time. However, I like the way that this experience is communicated. It's very straightforward. If you decide to look across the internet, there are many of these accounts, and I'll have to let you decide how reliable they are. I'll leave the links in the description to the sources. I've read quite a few of these now, and some are very innocuous where someone just sees a woman at the side of the river who they think could be La Llorona. Others go right up the other end of the scale where they're being chased by a paranormal entity. Some accounts are obviously made up, but others do seem far more credible, especially the ones from users with no other paranormal related content. So, what is the truth? Does a supernatural woman from beyond the grave really haunt the waterways of Latin America? Is there any truth to the legend? Do we have any evidence? In terms of written records, the earliest known mention of a similar tale dates back to the time of the Spanish conquests of the Americas in the 16th century. Spanish conquistadors and missionaries documented encounters with indigenous peoples who shared stories of supernatural beings associated with bodies of water. These included weeping women who were said to appear as omens or warnings. So this is quite encouraging, as we do have evidence in written form from as far back as the 16th century. Even at this stage, from my research, it looks as though these entities were considered paranormal and not just normal people. But can we do any better than written accounts? Is there any hard evidence to support the legend of La Llorona? Is there evidence for this one actually being true? Well, I'd say it's better than some legends, but as you might expect, there's not an overabundance of hard evidence. At least not hard evidence that stands up well to hard scrutiny. Which is fine, we're talking about supernatural entities here, and by their very nature, they would be elusive. While the legend of La Llorona is primarily passed down through oral tradition, there have been numerous reported sightings of the weeping woman throughout history. Many claim to have heard her mournful cries echoing near bodies of water, whilst others insist that they have seen her ghostly figure drifting along riverbanks or wandering through the streets at night. These sightings are often accompanied by a sense of dread and unease, leaving witnesses convinced of the supernatural nature of the phenomenon. Interestingly, some claim to have actually caught La Llorona on film. I've trawled through YouTube for some typical entries presented as real, and I'll show them here.
Ay, voy para mi casa yo. Que perro se escuchó. Ya casi llego ya a mi casa. Ay, güey. Tengo un pinche paniqueado. Ay, no mames, perra madre. Ah, su puta madre. No mames. Mamá.
Llámala a tu mamá. Cállate, concha tu madre. Oye, ¿qué es eso, ah? Cierra la puerta, cierra la puerta. ¿Qué es eso? ¿Qué es eso? ¿Qué es eso, ah? ¿Qué es eso? Mamá, ¿qué es eso? Cállate. Ay, qué miedo. ¿Quién es? Ay, mira.
As you know, I don't usually comment specifically on experience stories submitted to the channel. That's because I don't usually have a way of validating the story apart from checking the names and locations and details shared with me. Although sometimes my listener stories can seem a bit unbelievable as a listener, I do believe that the person telling the story did experience something. Perhaps they misremember small details, or the brain recontextualised certain events to fit the narrative after the event. Regardless, when people share their supernatural stories with me, I do tend to give them respect and take them at face value. Quite often it's very clear that they do believe what happened to them. It's also one of the reasons we often anonymise names and the exact places on the channel. More often than not, the person submitting the story doesn't want to be contacted outside of the channel. However, with these publicly available accounts such as La Llorona, I feel more comfortable to give an opinion as someone has put it out there to be seen. So, where do I land on the La Llorona story? Well, it's a good one as far as legends go. You've got the elements of a ghost or spirit, a likely scenario in terms of a murdered woman, and an actual reason for a haunting in terms of revenge. There is a written record from the 16th century of wailing women, and there are also supposed sightings captured on film. As with all stories though, I think we have to separate the fact from the fiction. The story origins, well, this one actually holds up very well. The idea that a woman was scorned by her lover and killed herself, sometimes along with her children in some of the tellings, that seems reasonable to me, and it has been established in Latin American folklore. As for the exact validity, we will never know, but keeping an open mind, I think it's reasonable to assume that this scenario has played out in history at some point. So in terms of an origin story, I'm giving a solid yes to this. As for the motivation for a spirit to roam between worlds, well, that also rings true if you do believe in the paranormal. Having ended your life in such tragic circumstances, it's not a leap to suggest that there's motivation to come back and haunt a location due to either grief or revenge. Personally, where the tellings of the Weeping Woman story fall down for me is in the modern interpretation and the evidence. And being a bit of a cynic, you'll find that this is a bit of a running theme for me. As we see here, how difficult is it to get a friend to dress up and walk along a roadside late at night? Also, if you really saw a ghost in this way, would you really hang around? I don't think I would. Of course, anything from TikTok you can just dismiss straight away, as it's intended just as disposable entertainment. To my eye, the other posts on these accounts don't exactly scream authentic either. The hard evidence? Well, I'm afraid it's just not too compelling in my opinion. But if you trawl the internet, you do find interesting accounts of La Llorona and similar entities. Not everyone is submitting a shocking video or trying to gain followers on their respective platforms. Some simply share their stories of the time they met a strange woman at the side of the road one night. These accounts are much more interesting and creepy in my opinion. When it's just an everyday person going about their business when they encounter an entity like La Llorona, that's where I think we need to pay closer attention. Can they all be made up? Imagined? For generations gone by, there was no internet, and for the large part, not always a written record, yet these stories survived and thrived. There's obviously a lot of room for interpretation, and taking accounts at face value on the internet is always a challenge. You have to wonder though, perhaps just a small percentage of these accounts are true, and that's what makes stories such as La Llorona so creepy and enduring. Either way, it's a fascinating piece of folklore, and one to really give you chills at the possibility that this one may just be true. Until next time, sleep well and don't go walking alone by the riverside late at night, just in case. If you enjoyed this week's paranormal story, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel for more tales of the supernatural and the unexplained.